Okay, here's our interview with Air Force Chief Master Sergeant Ken Battle. Is my man Darius Rucker from Charleston?
He is. He lives. I think he has a house out in West Ashley or somewhere out in that area. But I think he has moved to Nashville. I believe he bought a house in Nashville, and he's there now.
Oh man,
I know. But we spend a lot of time with him. You know, he helps us out through exchange.
Does he really?
Yes.
Well, let's start by talking about that, because I just happen to be a huge fan of his. I was a decent fan of Hootie and the Blowfish, but then when he became a country star, it was right about the same time that I started listening to country. I wasn't really a country music fan. Believe it or not, Taylor Swift turned me into a country music fan. And right around that same time, roughly, I think, is when Darius Rucker started doing country. And he's one of my favorite guys in country, and I've seen him a bunch of times. So he's kind of the local hero in Charleston. Yes,
he is. He does. He has a lot of philanthropy here. He, I think he supports the Monday After the Masters also. And he also assists by telling stories about Charleston. He hops in his vehicle and he rides around Charleston as a historian and talks about interesting historic sites and invites people to come here and take a great look at the Low Country.
And what is the thing that people need to know about Charleston?
Oh, it is a beautiful city. It is a place where you can come and just enjoy Southern hospitality. And if you go downtown, there's many historic sites, and we're actually talking about expanding sites that we could talk about in the minority community. So expanding beyond Charleston. Mm-hmm. So one of the areas that we're looking at right now is a town called Summerville, South Carolina. And that's, about 20 miles outside of Charleston. And all the historic locations and things that occurred in that Summerville area, like going on a maroon, because people used to leave Charleston because of health reasons and go to Summerville where they would maroon in Summerville until
what is maroon? What, that must be a Southern term. What does maroon mean?
Maroon, it's a term that we found out about that individuals in Charleston would use to designate when they were having a malaria outbreak or yellow fever, and they found that they would leave for the summer and maroon or visit for a while in Summersville, where there was no sickness. And it turned out to be mosquitoes because of the porous ground and the pines. They didn't have mosquitoes in Summerville, so Summerville became known as the healthiest place in the world. And people travel from all over.
So they were going there with malaria, basically?
No, they would come here so they would escape malaria.
Right. But they would have malaria, and that's why they would go there? Or you're saying, no, they got out of anywhere that was infested with it?
They would get out of town before before there was any opportunity for the mosquitoes to
And is that all true still today? You got a bunch of mosquitoes in Charleston, but
there's mosquitoes all over now.
Oh, even in
with the growth of Summerville, and with the growth of the city itself, the pines, the longleaf pines are disappearing. So yeah, we have our share of mosquitoes.
That's one thing I don't miss, and a lot of people here in Los Angeles don't really understand or appreciate, is the significance of the fact that we don't have mosquitoes for the most part, and we don't have most bugs. It's dry and it's deserty, and it's one of the things that you really appreciate if you've been in mosquito infested.
That's exactly right.
So
when you have wetlands and so forth around here,
so you're constantly spraying. You don't go out at night without a can of off with you, huh?
Something.
Yeah. So, and give us kind of the take on history as far as, the Civil War and all that, and the Confederate flag and all
it's
that.
Interesting you ask that, because that's one of the areas when, as a military member, when I retired, I wanted to do something to continue to serve in the community. So I was learning to be an amateur historian, but not necessarily studying the Civil War. I was looking at what was going on with slavery and freedom instead. And this same term, maroon, turned out to identify individuals that arrived here at Gadsden's Wharf, saw what was going on with slavery, and said, to heck with that. And they ran, and they lived in the swamps around our area, Four Hole Swamp, Oak Brook, Beach Hill, and they lived free in those swamps. And they were called Maroons. That's something in history that is not talked about very much and is just now being investigated. So that's something that we are working on and identifying in our local area to get that story out. Individuals who live free until Emancipation Proclamation.
So they escaped. Is that right, from a plantation?
They escaped. They would go. Say they would be out about 15 miles from Charleston, and they would look and see that it was 15 miles to Charleston, but 500 yards to freedom. And the militia could not retrieve them once they got into the swamps. They didn't fight. They just went deeper into the swamps.
And what would it be like? What would it be like to live in the swamps? I mean, how swampy are we talking here?
They would find high ground, and they would plant and grow food. They would also reach back to individuals that were on the plantation. And that was another reason why many slaves didn't go into the Underground Railroad. Instead, they would find an area that they could live and still see their families. So they would trade with the plantation. As individuals on the plantation, if they completed their work, they were given time off. So if there were shingles or something that had to be made, the Maroons would trade with them for a hoe or a chicken or a hog or something like that they could use while they're in the swamps. And so it was a beneficial relationship. That worked out quite well for them, so there were hundreds of individuals surrounding the plantation. And the owners didn't really want to talk about all the individuals who were free living around them, because it gave them an incentive to slaves on the plantation to leave. Mm-hmm.
Sounds like that could make a pretty good movie.
It will.
You're writing it as we speak, huh?
We're working that as we speak.
Ah, very cool, very cool. Well, hopefully my man Darius Rucker can get involved in that. So am I right that you also have worked or currently work with the great Senator Tim Scott?
That's correct. I volunteer with Senator Scott. I'm one of the individuals that he looks to help out whenever he's in the Low Country. I try to work with individuals in the community in terms of outreach. His outreach coordinator and I work together to get information from the community that we could pass on to him and give him an idea of what's going on and what the needs are for local constituents that are Black and Hispanic, especially in the area. And some of the topics that he might want to approach and talk about, and basically provide feedback. So I've been doing that also since I retired. I've known Tim Scott for years, ever since he was on county council, and I followed his career. So I was happy to assist him in any way I could.
Yeah, he's obviously kind of a rising national star right now. You could very easily see him like as a vice presidential candidate with somebody in a few
Absolutely.
years. What's just share with us some intimate thing about Tim Scott. What should people know about Senator Scott?
I think the most important thing that I would say is how deeply spiritual he is. He He's a God-fearing man, and he loves his mom. And we spend a lot of time talking about things that we can do to make sure that his mom's comfortable, and just talking about what he can do for her. And I think the love that he has for her helps to also give him that concern and appreciation for serving the community, because she sacrificed so much for him that he's now serving and sacrificing for the people. So
So help us understand, I'm live in woke Los Angeles and so on, where, how is a black man in South Carolina a Republican? Explain that to people.
I think one thing that many people don't understand, many blacks are very conservative individuals. And it just so happens that the Republican Party really professes to be the party of conservatism that we can identify with. But we're for God, for family, for country. And so it's a difficult road here in the South, trying to explain to individuals why you believe what you believe. And as a black man here, I'm unapologetic about my conservatism. But I also serve. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so, I would say, important that people see results. And that's where I am. I'm looking not so much to work with individuals who protest, who talk. I'm looking for those who are action-oriented, success-oriented, results-oriented. And so being a conservative individual and a conservative black man here makes that somewhat difficult because there's so many people who don't believe the same thing that I believe. But we are growing in numbers as we see results come in, as we are successful in our endeavors. We have more and more people join our movement. So it is difficult though, because there's a lot of peer pressure. And I grew up within a Democratic stronghold within our family. I can't remember of one family member that I knew of that was a Republican or that thought in a conservative way. But they lived a conservative life, but they didn't vote that way. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, not really understanding the South that well. I don't know what came to be that way. I mean, all of the Jim Crow laws were passed by Democrats. That was the Democrat Party that passed the Jim Crow laws, and they're the ones that keep labeling things. That's a Jim Crow law. That's a Jim Crow law. Yeah, Jim Crow voting laws in Georgia is like, well, okay, but you should know you were the party that passed those laws to begin with.
I know, and reaching back and talking with individuals about the history, I recognize that they really didn't want to talk about that. They're more concerned about what's going on with them today. And so whenever I have a conversation with them, I talk about the things that are occurring today. I talk about the policies that are out there that are considered democratic policies and how detrimental they are for the Black community. I mean, I look at the social programs and I try to explain how they have failed the minority community, especially the Black community, because they continually perpetuate victimhood. And my entire message to the community that I live in is that we should be working together to strengthen our own community and not look to someone to come and save us. I've observed so many individuals waiting for someone else to come into the community and do the things that we come in and do for ourselves. It's really hard to watch someone sitting back and waiting for someone else to save them. And then they call and talk about racism, and they talk about the privilege of white people, and yet and still they won't sit back and work with their own culture, work within their own culture to make their own livelihood better. They would instead reach out to these individuals who they consider racist to come and actually do whatever they can to make their livelihood better. So it to me, it's sometimes it's hypocritical.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think victimhood is a good way of putting it, and to suggest that you need to be somehow rescued by the government, or that somehow the white person needs to change in some way in order for you to be successful, or to raise your child to believe anything other than the fact that through effort and hard work, you can achieve anything you want to achieve, as opposed to raising a child to believe things are going to be hard out there. People are going to look down on you. The white man doesn't like you. It's going to be rough. I mean, why would you put these thoughts into the head of a child? But that's essentially what this movement is telling parents to do.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what they're actually indoctrinating them, and looking for them to accept victimhood. In terms of having a conversation and talking about being results oriented, they bring up acting white. So anytime you're actually trying to be rational or reasonable and result oriented, they call that acting white. And it always, it always
action oriented is acting white.
Yes, big, looking at things where knowledge builds confidence. Reading, I've been here. I actually arrived in 1984 in the military, and one of the first things that I was met with in terms of education in the educational system here was that most of the children could not read. And I said, well, why not just put a reading program, putting something together, where we can support the families and teach them to read. But they're still talking about the exact same thing that we were talking about in 1984 in the educational system today. So instead of arguing or constantly having a vocal conversation with them, I went out and helped to develop a charter school that would reach out to these disconnected students, 14 to 21 years old, and get them their high school diploma. These kids had given up on the traditional public school system, and they were married now. They were working now, So we hired advocates to go out and reach out to them and say, look, a high school diploma is foundational. It will change your life. We have an opportunity for you to come back and get your high school diploma. And our school is a non-traditional type of education, but it's virtual and it's in person, but it's not a classroom. You can come in, it's a cafe style. You can sit in a lounge chair, have a cup of coffee. And if you need a certified science teacher, they come to you. So we were able to get them the high school diploma as fast as they would like to work. So in 6 months to a year. And we're being very successful. We thought we'd only have about 100 students maybe that would take advantage of this program, this charter school. And we're now at 460 students and growing. So this is the type of action-oriented things that I'm talking about. Put things
as
in
opposed
place
to
where people can choose.
Yeah, as opposed to what we're doing here in California. Well, if blacks are disproportionately not meeting the testing requirements for math, then let's get rid of the requirements.
Exactly.
That's the response.
Lower the standards.
Lower the standards. I mean, it's as if they have it's as if they have no concern or compassion for the individual. It's like, but what are you doing to this individual that you're lowering the standards for this individual, rather than doing the harder work, which is what you're doing, the action work. You're doing the action work, which is saying, well, wait a minute. If these Black children are not meeting the standards, let's figure out why they're not meeting the standards, and let's help them meet the standards.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
but this has been going on for decades. The left
is just one area.
Yeah. But that's why with the left in control of our big cities, which they absolutely are, where you have large percentages of the Black community, these are the policies that have been pursued now for decades and have been of utter failure because you haven't seen the advancement that we should have seen by now.
Now you understand CRT, and CRT. I'm not going to go into the definition of it all over again. I think we all now recognize the issues that we have with critical race theory. But now we can say for certain that the oppressor and the oppressed has been identified. In CRT, Black people will always be inferior, and white people would always be superior. And that's what they're being taught and indoctrinated in school to believe. And the best way to have an individual, to defeat an individual, is to make sure that individual doesn't fight at all. He gives up before he even starts. And this is what's happening with our youth. They're constantly telling them that they can't succeed, that someone else is oppressing them.
Now, I have to interrupt you here.
Excuses.
I have to interrupt you here because, I'm seeing CRT, critical race theory, is starting to get into the mainstream. It's being talked about. Yes. This was something that was relegated to conservative media and Fox News and so on. And it's gotten so far out in the open, as a result of what's going on in the school boards and so on, and more people raising it, that now the left has to kind of respond to it. And so now you are hearing it on your MSNBCs and your CNNs. They are talking about it, and they're basically dismissing it as something that is being created by the right. Once again, the white supremacist right are just using this to try to, fight against teachers' unions, to close the public school system down, etc. So they say this is all made up. This is a boogeyman. What can you say? What knowledge do you have about critical race theory actually being utilized in the schools?
Well, look at it this way. When we recognize that the school system is looking at everything through the lens of race, they're teaching our children, especially Black children, that they are inferior. Now, they know that CRT is considered academic. So in order for the system to work, you would have to reach out, talk with these students, and tell them in a way that they will not succeed because someone else is oppressing them. And that white students being privileged, being born white, are privileged and have all the benefits of being white. So I would say that teaching CRT, teaching critical race theory in the school is not overt, but anytime you have a conversation about it, it's presented to them in a way where it's filtered through race. It's filtered through the idea that they're being oppressed.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, because, it's easy to dismiss it and say, well, it's not like the kids walk into the classroom and it says, okay, kids, today we're going to learn about critical race theory. But all of this nonsense comes from critical race theory, which is basically that America was founded on racist foundings, that our systems and institutions are permeated with racism, that needs to be acknowledged, recognized, and equity needs to be put into place. And so for sure,
this is what's happening in our military also. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to be a part of standing together against racism and radicalism in the services, because we're not creating warriors. We're trying to create social justice warriors. You know, our oath has us defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And to have our officers and our enlisted men look at one another through the lens of race, it affects the chain of command. It also affects respect. You know, if you have no respect for the leaders appointed over you, it's harmful to good order and discipline. So we have to focus our attention again on the war fighter, you know, and really move away from this idea of wokeness within the military, you know, and political correctness within the military. It is harmful to good order and discipline, and it's harmful to all the individuals, you know, like me, who are a part of the military, who serve as veterans, who serve as a brotherhood, you know, to have to watch what's going on.
Well, let's talk about, because
military.
You were in the military for a lot of years, over 30 years, right? Approximately
33 years. Yes.
33 years. And people who listen to my show have heard me state this before, but they're going to hear it again because I want to get your thoughts. This is from my friend who was a plebe at West Point Academy in 1985. And he told me a story that obviously was impactful for him. That's why he told me the story, that if you're asked by the officer, Plebe Johnson, how many black men are in your platoon? The correct answer is, sir, I don't know, sir.
That's
because
the correct answer.
They were trained to be colorblind. It appears to be the exact opposite. So what has happened? Did you see it firsthand yourself, this creeping in while you were there? I mean, when did this really, this complete 180-degree change in our military, where what race you are is the first thing that everybody's supposed to recognize? How did this change? When did this change?
I cannot tell you when it actually changed. You know, as I was beginning to serve and growing into the ranks of leadership, we were more or less involved in getting the mission done.
Gee, what a novel concept.
We started to notice it later on. As our new recruits would be assigned to the station, to the air base. We started to notice that they were being coddled in a sense. You know, when I went back and observed in basic training, if there was an opportunity, if there was an instance, you know, where an individual felt, you know, that he was being stressed, he could call timeout. I can't remember a day that I could call timeout, you know, and have an opportunity to sit back for a few minutes. You know, I remember the day I arrived there, you know, and it was my mistake. I arrived with too many items, you know, and that pick them up and put them down thing. By the time I was done, I had one little suitcase and that was it. Pick it up, put it down. I have no idea where the rest of my items were.
One of my favorite movies of all time.
We were all the same.
One of my favorite movies of all time is An Officer and a Gentleman. Are you pretty familiar with that movie?
I'm a little familiar with it.
Yeah. So, you know, that looked, you know, officer candidate school, I think they call it, right? Anyway, but they show him going through, you know, basic training and so on, and it looks pretty rough. There was no coddling going on. Is that kind of the way it was, and no longer is?
That was the way it was. You know, we went in, we were all different. And when we left, we were the same. We were a brotherhood. And the purpose behind that was was to build the respect for one another, that we were there, and that you could depend on your brother to the left or your brother to the right, and we would leave no man behind. This sense of duty, of respect, of honor, that's what we left with. We're finding that our young men, our young officers, and our young enlisted men don't have that same fire for the country. And they're being, we call it indoctrinated, to look at everything through that lens of race, instead of seeing a brother in the military, instead of seeing that individual that you would go into battle with. And when you take the focus off of the mission, everyone is harmed, everyone. And the country is harmed because our military isn't strengthened. We need to go back to developing leaders, individuals who are there to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, to defend this country, to stand on their oath. And so if we do not focus on that, then the principle of what you allow, you deserve comes into play. So if we're sitting back and we're allowing this to happen within our academies, then we deserve the results that we're seeing today. So it's up to the alumni. It's up to individuals who are patriots to see this happening, to stand up and say something about it.
Right. So we're gonna air this tomorrow morning on Veterans Day, and I know in talking to General Rod Bishop, he's asking veterans to renew their oath, which is, yes, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And it goes on, but I want to focus on that part because right. I know that it's General Bishop's belief that we have a domestic enemy. Do you share that belief, and how do you identify this domestic enemy?
I do share that belief, but when I look at that domestic enemy, it's the individuals, to me, who are not a part of the military. It's an ideology that's out there that's becoming more and more pervasive, and it's causing division. Our whole goal is to create unity. Our whole goal is to create support for the men and women in the military. When you divide, then you will cause problems. You can conquer, and that principle doesn't change. Division is an issue. Unity is what we should look for and support. And so I'm with General Bishop in that sense. I do see this ideology of Marxism creeping in and causing division.
Can you identify?
Anyway.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you identify this enemy? In other words, where is this all emanating from? Is there some central place that we can look to say that this is where this ideology is coming from, and they're having meetings once a week or on a daily basis, and they're planning this semi overthrow of the U.S. system by using race?
No, I don't think it's that overt. I believe it's manifesting itself in some of the leadership and the academics that are being put forth. I believe that they're working and utilizing individuals and giving them, they're misguiding them. So what occurs with to me, this is just the way that I look at it. What occurs to me is that when an individual comes in and he feels that he's being oppressed, then that allows him to be susceptible to other ideologies, and he gets confused. So collective, the fact that they're saying, well, this collectivism, it's good for the group, it will eventually be destructive. So I can't say that you can point to it and say overtly, look, there it is in front of you. What I'm saying is you listen to the type of words and situations that are put before you, and that's how it's being identified.
And you probably
anyway,
have a lot of people
looking at it.
A lot of people are participating in it unwittingly, I would say, right? I mean, you have some people.
I would say so.
Yeah,
I would say that they think they're actually working and doing something that they would consider beneficial for the community, and it turns out that it would lead to the destruction of that community. I'll give you an example of one of the things that we've worked on here. There was a young man, 94 years old, World War II vet. He worked at a business in the town of Somerville for 40 years. He was the first Black man elected to county council there, and he was a jazz drummer for Count Basie. He had lived in this community all these years, and no one knew about him. The youth didn't know about him, and the town didn't seem to know about him. When we went in and allowed him to begin to speak, history was made, because they found out not only was he a veteran, but he was also one of the individuals that had been a part of secret experimentation, and he had not received any benefits. So our local legislators were able to help him get his benefits. But the important part of everything that occurred with him is the community completely changed their idea of who this man was. And they look to him now as a leader, as a individual that they could look to support the community. And he began to speak to youth about respect and duty and honor. And it made a tremendous difference in the lives of those youth. Now, if he was not available for them to have a conversation with, I shudder to wonder what their lives would have been like, because they hadn't met a veteran with such a profound background and history right there in their town. So it makes a difference who you look upon. So that principle of what you look upon, you become, is another important idea and principle that we try to share. Because putting these individuals before our youth and letting them see and learn from individuals who they consider the heroes of the community, it makes a profound impression on their lives. So in saying it that way, imagine going to elementary school and not having these individuals around anymore. And that is what worries me about what's going on with critical race theory. They're actually separating these individuals out, not allowing them to have an opportunity to speak with our youth. They're dividing them and instead focusing through race and pointing to oppressors, which creates tremendous problems in the psyche of these youth. And they go home asking why white people hate them, or why they will never be able to succeed in one of the greatest countries on this earth. we have to find a way to make sure our youth do not be subjected to this constant indoctrination that causes them to believe that they are inferior, and find a way today to make sure that they understand that hard work, that family, that love for their country is important, and that saying the pledge is not detrimental to them as an individual, and shows that this country is oppressing them, that it is actually a sign of respect and honor. So it really infuriates me sometimes to see what's happening with our youth.
I'm curious about something, because you're so on the front lines of dealing with these issues in the Black community in Charleston and South Carolina. What is Black Lives Matter doing in these communities? What are they doing? What do you see them doing to help these communities? Because there's probably no organization that's raised more money that I can think of in a year. What organization, nonprofit, has raised more money than Black Lives Matter? So tell me what you see them doing in Charleston.
Well, it's important to understand also that Black Lives Matter means something different in the Black community. Black Lives Matter as an organization is a Marxist organization. That's not how many Black people in the Black community view Black Lives Matter. They're thinking about their life. When they say Black Lives Matter, they're actually saying my life matters. Black Lives Matter as an organization, however, does nothing for our Black community here. Black Lives Matter will come in, and individuals in that organization, they create chaos, they create protests, and then the next day, there's nothing. There's nothing to show for it. You know? So the focus that they're trying to portray really is to get some media attention, raise some more money, and do nothing to improve the Black community.
They're not there building
away from
Black Lives Matter hasn't built any community. They haven't built any community centers in Charleston.
They have not worked on a project that I cannot point to one project that Black Lives Matter has come in, shared funds for, and built that would support the community.
What I've been trying to remind people of as much as possible, and I've just been thinking of late, is Occupy Wall Street. And you know, that was very recent, but not that long ago, right? Occupy Wall Street.
It wasn't that long ago.
They were in the parks, and there were all these radical, losers taking over public spaces. And then you see today, you're like, wait a minute, this looks a lot like the Black Lives Matter movement. They take over public spaces. They're not predominantly Black, by the way. If you look at those demonstrations, Absolutely. They're predominantly white. And this Kyle Rittenhouse, who's on trial right now for murder, the kid that's on trial for the Kenosha, Wisconsin murders,
right?
The three people he murdered were white at this Black Lives Matter demonstration, and they were each one of them had a criminal background and a direct Marxist communist background if you look at their social media. So that's what makes you realize that, wait a minute, this is Occupy Wall Street in sheep's clothing. Occupy Wall Street was more out there that clearly this is an economic movement. If it's you're talking about Occupy Wall Street, this is an economic movement. When you say Black Lives Matter, it makes it appear that, oh, no, this is just fighting racism. But that's when you marry the two together, that's when you really realize that these are really the same movements. They are communist movements. That's what Occupy Wall Street was all about, is the people rising up against the upper class. They realize that this doesn't work as well. What really resonates with Americans is racism, because nobody wants to be called a racist. In America, we don't really begrudge rich people for the most part. At least we didn't. And that's why that movement was not as successful. But, you know, nobody wants to be called a racist. And obviously America does have.
Yeah. Look what's going on with Black Lives Matter right now. You know, in this sense also, Black Lives Matter raised millions of dollars, right? And they recruited individuals. If you happen to be Black and you were participating in this and you were arrested, then maybe they would come out and they would provide some bail money for you, you know, but what else did they provide for you? You know, because you would walk away with a criminal record. You'd have to go back to court. The attorney would be the one that receives all the money, you know, and his son would be the one that would go to Harvard. You know, yeah. I did not understand why Black people did not recognize, you know, and the economics behind it and the millions that were raised behind it didn't go to Black organizations, didn't go to help the individuals where like in Chicago, where so many have lost their lives. How many of them have been helped by Black Lives Matter? You know, their families lost a loved one. You know, the crime rate that has gone through the roof, the defund the police movement. You know, that who suffered? It was the Black community that suffered. They were less safe. So all of these policies that I've watched before within the Black community, they led to even more destruction in the Black community. And why individuals aren't seeing that, you know.
Let me say this to you, who again, you're the real deal. You're working on the front lines to solve issues. One of the founders of Black Lives Matter, and I think, what is it, 2 or 3 women? I think it's 3 women. It's 3 women that get credit as being the founders. One of them lives very close to me here. She lives in Topanga Canyon, California.
Okay.
Topanga Canyon, I think I used to drive through there to work every day and have stopped there many times. I've never in my life seen a Black person in Topanga Canyon. She's probably living in the whitest town that exists in the state of California. That's where she is. This woman who supposedly is so concerned about Black lives. She's so concerned about Black lives, and she lives in Topanga Canyon, a remote little community in Los Angeles that is as white as it can be. That kind of tells you everything you need to know.
That really. Now, and we spend a lot of time talking about the issue of Black Lives Matter and the problems, you know, that we have here in the Black community. I believe also that this is a huge distraction for us also. If you waste this amount of time, and that's how I look at it, you waste this amount of time talking about these issues, verbalizing it without taking any kind of action, it is even more harmful for the community because they're completely distracted. We need to start talking about what we are doing and what we can do in terms of unity in our communities. You know, there are individuals. I've come across a group in Georgia, for instance. They got together, pooled their money, and purchased land. And through the Black Achievement Fund, now they're building a city. Huge. They're working with individuals within their organization to improve their lot in life. And they're doing it in a way where they support one another. These are the kind of things that we need to talk about in the Black community, instead of constantly trying to figure out whether or not Black Lives Matter is going to come in and save us, or whether Al Sharpton or Jesse Jackson are going to come in and speak in our town or something. No, it's time for us to wake up and start working together. We have billions of dollars that we can utilize together to make our lives better. You know, so,
do you agree with what Barack Obama used to say, that the biggest problem, or among the biggest problem in the Black communities, is the absence of Black fathers?
Yes, absolutely. You know, the destruction of the family was one way to continue victimhood, because when you think about how knowledge is passed on in the Black community, it was passed on through storytelling. In order to have that, you had to have a family unit where the parents shared the knowledge and the wisdom that they had and passed it on down through legacy through their youth. If you want to continually make sure that individuals do not succeed, the best way to do that is to destroy the family unit. And that's what has been happening. That's what happened with welfare. That's what's happening even today, where they're trying to put some universal income in place. It's what's happening in our education system, where they're lowering the standards instead of challenging our youth. So all of this combined is detrimental for the youth in the minority community. And with this process and with the destruction of the family, this process can be continued. We have to go back to make marriage popular again. We have to work in a way where we teach our youth that that getting an education and let that knowledge create confidence in them. We have to make sure that when we talk with them about owning property and owning land, what that means for legacy. There's many individuals out there right now with air property. They don't understand the value and the assets that they have available to them right now.
And all this type of work that you do, community work and work with schools and so on, is all extremely helpful and necessary. But by the same token, we all recognize that everything starts in the home. And yes, that's where the child is still going to get 90% of whatever they're going to take off with them when they leave home when they're 18 years old. It comes from the home. And right now, you've got a high incidence of lack of Black fathers in the home. And I was reading something that indicated that this has also done a full 180. That back in I'm just going to kind of pick a decade because I don't recall specifically, but it was 40s and 50s. Mm-hmm. There was actually more Black fathers in the home than white fathers as far as the incidence of single family homes.
Yes.
And it's
when you go back and you look at Black Wall Street, same thing.
And it's totally flipped. So, and I guess the theory is that it was welfare where we were rewarding having children that caused single mothers, people to have children, even though it wasn't the right environment for it. I mean, the right environment to have a child is you've been in a long-term relationship. Ideally, you've been married. You've made a lifetime commitment to each other. You then make a conscious decision that, we love each other so much, we're ready to start a family. And then you have a child, and maybe you have a second and a third. And that's how children are supposed to be born into this world. But,
exactly.
But
you had that moral support from your church also.
But when you, there's an economic incentive to have a child sooner than following those steps I just identified.
Exactly.
Over decades and time, you end up having what we have today, where people aren't waiting until they're in this loving marriage.
And that
is that right though?
Is the
right explanation
process,
for it? Because honestly, I don't know.
Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams have identified, specifically that process and talked about how detrimental that has been and how it destroyed the Black families. In my life, I grew up living in that environment. My mom and dad did split up, but my grandparents helped me to understand that hard work and education, and it constantly showed me that you could be whatever you wanted to be. They never told me that I couldn't achieve something. And they grew up during a period of time where racism was much more pervasive, for me not to really recognize it You know, I still look back on how in the world did I not get so engrossed in what was going on with race. I remember a story. A time my grandmother took me out grocery shopping, and I'm walking with her, and she's bumping me. You know, I'm trying to figure, why does she keep bumping me like this? You know, apparently we weren't supposed to go into a certain door or area to go shopping. She had a specific area that Black people were allowed to go in and do their shopping. I never knew that, you know, but she didn't tell me I couldn't shop in the other area. What she did, she just made sure that she guided me to the area where she could get the food and pay for it and leave.
Wow.
It was years later before I recognized that this was separate but equal, you know, whatever you wanted to call it. But
you're a lot older you're a lot older than I thought, my friend.
Oh yeah, I'm 65 and growing.
So when you were a child, some of those policies were still in place. We're still in place. The colored only. But yeah, what a gift! And this is the point of your story, I believe. What a gift she gave you, not to put this in your head that you can only go here and not there. She hid from true racism, right? True racism, exactly. not a lot of the BS you hear today that they call racism, right. Real racism, and she sheltered you from it.
Yes, and by doing so, those seeds were never planted, and they never took root within me to say that I could not achieve something.
Right.
You know, so I give homage to my grandmother for a lot of the things that she taught me, the wisdom she had. You know, even in my marriage today, she was able to guide me. When I got married, I wanted to go out and spend all kinds of money, you know, but she gave me ideas about how to make my marriage stronger. You know, say, hey, buy this ring, and every 5 years, when she asked, you upgrade that ring. You know, and it was that stuck with me for years, and I've been married now for 43 years. And when my wife said, okay, I think my diamond's large enough now, I'm good. You know, I would think of my grandmother.
That's great.
But
well, you know, the other thing I
things like this that I'm just so grateful for that I had the opportunity to live in this country. You know, being in the military, you're able to go around the world and you see how other people live. And I believe that's something that many in the minority community never had the opportunity to do. If they could just get a glimpse of what it's like in other places and see what we have here in America, it would be tremendous. I think much more gratitude, much more appreciation would be received and understood.
Well, if people were able, I agree with you. If people were able to travel, they would see that the vast majority of the world, probably, again, picking a number, 90%, lives below America's poverty line. The rest of the world lives, what we call poverty is middle class around the world. I mean, you haven't seen real poverty until you've traveled to you know, places like Morocco or other countries in Africa or Central America or South America. I mean, just about everywhere. I mean, you know, poverty there is no electricity, no running water, no cable television. It's just no comparison.
There's no comparison to living in the United States and being surrounded by individuals who are servant-minded. You know, I'm a member of the Exchange Club, America's Service Organization, and it's another brotherhood. It's another group of individuals who look at making our community a better place to live, and they help me to understand how important it is to serve the community. And by working with them, I'm able to go out and share that with the Black community, with the Hispanic community, with the American Indian community. You know, when I worked in the commission for the governor here, for the Commission for Minority Affairs, I was able to build relationships with many of the minority communities across the state and to share the idea of achievement and what they could do to work within their own communities and to grow it and to create unity. It was nothing like it. It just gave you that feeling of accomplishment. And I'm hoping that as we continue to work in the educational system and we continue to work in our communities, that more and more Black people will start to recognize that it's about service. It's about service to this country. That's important. It's about serving your fellow man. You know, Black people do not see other Black people coming to their aid. I want to see that happen more. You know, and I believe that because that principle of what you look upon, you become, when they see more Black individuals serving them and making their community better, it will change their mindset. Education will change your mindset. You know, success, respect, loyalty, all of these things are important. And these virtues that are becoming passé in a sense, you know, because I very rarely see individuals in the minority community with a flag somewhere nearby, you know, or saying the Pledge of Allegiance or singing the national anthem. I make that a point wherever I go, that if I see an area that may be governmental or maybe public, if it's not a flag available, I ask why. Why is an American flag in this location? I mean, it's one of the locations where it should be, and sometimes they have no idea. So we get a flag and we make sure that that's taken care of. You know, why the flag isn't being flown in front of schools, why children are going out in the morning and performing that ceremony. It's important that we instill within our youth the basic foundational truths that make this country great. And we need to continue to talk to them and share with them the meaning of the Constitution and how important it is to their lives each and every day. We don't do that enough.
Thank you again to Chief Master Sergeant Ken Battle. Happy Veterans Day to all. And thank you also to our producer, Michael Parker. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Hidden Truth Show.
Thank you for listening to The Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow. You can find us at hiddentruthshow.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hidden Truth Show. Join us again next week for another episode of Hidden Truth Show with Jim Breslow.